Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. And today we're going to be talking about the recent developments between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. And helping us navigate this mess is going to be Jonathan Fink of Silicon Curtain.
So I'm delighted to be invited back on. I'm Jonathan Fink. I'm the host of Silicon Curtain, and this is it's. I'm accused of being a journalist sometimes. Actually, I'm an informational activist. I think I should describe it as. And this is a pro-Ukraine podcast that I run that has been going since the start of the full-scale war, when the first missiles were falling on the 24th of February 2022. I was putting together a guest list, joined Twitter, and started planning out how we could fight back against Russian BS informationally. And here we are, unfortunately, still already in the fourth year and doing the same thing.
Yeah, but fortunately, still doing the same thing because I feel like a lot of people have given up. So that's good news in that regard. Speaking of Russian informational BS, there seems to be a rift between Trump and Putin. They're no longer exchanging pleasantries on Truth Social and Twitter or magazine headlines because I guess Putin doesn't necessarily know how modern technology works. There was that really funny bit between Medvedev and Trump recently, where they were having a bit of a spat. What do you think of all of these rapidly changing sort of views and rapidly declining relationship between the US and Russia?
I think of it as one theatre on the one hand, and I think a lot of people mistake the theatre for the action. And most of what Trump says and does is theatrics. And I think a lot of the stuff around Putin at this stage is still in that theatrical mode. Yes, the tone has changed, the words that are being used has changed, but no, he is not ever particularly rude about Putin personally. He doesn't necessarily condemn Putin in his actions. He just expresses this kind of disappointment, the kind of disappointment you might have where, one of your golf buddies, does something bad or cheats in the game or, refuses to come out to the bar every night. It's like, I'm disappointed in him. This isn't real condemnation. Remember, Putin is a mass murderer, a killer. He is conducting a genocidal war, has been indicted for kidnapping children. He is a monster on a historical scale. So Trump's language towards Putin doesn't match the situation, and we are yet to see action that is commensurate to any of those words. The difference between that and how he treats Medvedev is kind of interesting because here there's a power relationship between Putin and Trump. Trump clearly has admiration for dictators and especially Putin, what he's able to get away with, the fact there are very little constraints on his power and authority. Um, he is the organ grinder, and you have Medvedev, the monkey, yapping away, yap, 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 yap. Of course, Trump is not going to like that. He will have no respect for Medvedev. Medvedev has no power, no authority, and to have the organ grinder let his monkey yap away at you, that of course is going to be a major irritant to Trump, and of course it's very amusing seeing him slap him down. But let's face it, Medvedev is nothing and a nobody. It's highly likely he was a nothing and nobody even when he was Prime Minister of Russia. He may have believed, or president when he was interim president, and certainly as Prime Minister he had no power. He may have believed he had some influence, but he was brushed aside very quickly and put up no resistance to that. He is nothing. He's nobody. He has no power whatsoever. So again, I think we're looking here at theatrics until we see actual actions, which is massive sanctions against Russia, which, let's face it, at this point, we need something a little bolder just than sanctions. We need massive supply of arms, defensive arms and offensive arms to Ukraine. Until that happens, then frankly, this is all just noise.
Yeah, it's definitely just noise, but that noise kind of plays to Putin, right? Because if the noise was supported by actions, like it seldom but still was with Biden, Putin would back away a little bit. Meanwhile, with Trump, I think that the fact that he is just saying things but not doing anything is encouraging Russia to continue its like deadly assaults on Ukraine. And I don't just mean on the front line; I mean in the in the civilian environment. It's gotten way way worse. First of all, we have way less air defense, and we can't necessarily freely use Patriot systems as much as we did before. So, for instance, in my personal case, right, I used to not go to the bomb shelter when it was Shahed drones because I knew all of them would be taken down. Now they fly much lower and they fly in swarms of, instead of 100, there is 700 of them. And that paired with missiles, it does, it results in a lot more destruction.
And they're
For
getting
instance,
faster as well, aren't they? You've seen the ones that now have little rocket engines on the back. It used
yeah.
to be the case that those could be potentially shot down by mobile air defense units with, heavy caliber ammunition there. That's not the case with these faster ones. They require Patriots or something similar. And it's just saying the numbers they're coming through, it's just not feasible for the sheer quantity of Patriots that would be required.
Yeah, it's not possible at all. And again, like they come in a lot larger numbers. They overwhelm the air defense. Again, the swarms used to be 100 and now it's 700. That's 7 times more. They cause a lot more destruction in the sense that, it used to be 1, 2 impact sites. Now it's 26 at a time. This last attack that happened on the 31st was, or on the 30th to 31st, was brutal in a sense that, I think I'm very used to on this channel, especially say every time there is an air attack, I'm used to saying, hey, this was the worst one so far. And I know I've said this before, but this one was actually much worse. So the last one, I wouldn't say was the worst one because there was definitely not as many Shahed drones. It was around 300, not 700, and it was only 8 missiles. However, something very new, I suppose, happened where normally, and I live quite central, so I usually, missiles never reach me, or debris of missiles don't really reach me. I'm not like, I'm not in the very center, but I'm kind of like, let's say in what's considered the last bits of of Central Cave. And this time, the missiles were taken down right above my neighborhood, pretty much, which is very uncanny and which is very new. It's unprecedented, never happened before. And the sheer noise that I could feel, it felt like it was taken down in my apartment building while it was 5 to 7 kilometers away. And the other thing I think that was new and everyone saw this video going viral is the flashes of light of the missiles being taken down. I think they were flying lower than they usually do. And because they were being shot down so central, and they were all kind of coming in a swarm, and they were shot down all in about the same area, it created this kind of effect of like the sun exploding. It was honestly like daylight during the night, and it was incredibly scary. It was a very new feeling. No one has really seen that before. Also, they've stopped they started shooting Iskanders from like launch sites instead of using their aviation. So when they use aviation and when their jet fighters launch, usually you have like an hour before the missiles enter Ukrainian airspace. Here, if they use the launchers, it's about 2 to 10 minutes, depending on where you are. So one of the worst parts about it is usually you're warned about it. You have plenty of time to go to the bomb shelter. For instance, like let's say the bombers take off at midnight. They're going to be here around 1 a.m., 1:30. Here, we all went back home because the air raid was over at 5:30, and then at 6 in the morning, out of nowhere, there were 8 missiles flying at us. So they're changing tactics, and these tactics are a lot more disruptive to the lives of Ukrainians as well because it's not like you can plan for missile strikes to begin with, but for these, it's much harder to plan your actions.
And they're clearly designed to inflict maximum casualties. That idea of we see double tap, triple tap, and as my friend filmed outside the Bristol Hotel in Odessa some months ago, a quadruple tap strike. These are designed to take out civilians, cause maximum casualties, and they're also designed to take out first responders who get to the scene. So it seems that these tactics are specifically designed to exact a higher toll on civilians, men, women, children. We saw a child tragically killed in yesterday's strikes. doesn't it in some ways horrific that, of course, the newspapers will cover it when it's the biggest raid ever? They'll kind of cover it, and they covered the largest ones. The first one where you had a significant increase in shaheeds, but now it's still increasing. And of course, the mainstream media is like, well, we've done that story already. We can't have that story every single day. Another major strike. We're going to move on and talk about something else. There seems to be a real structural issue in the way the media is functioning here, because the strikes on Kiev are probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, story in world news. But the news media is allergic to sort of repetition, and this doesn't play well at all. I still have people coming up and saying, "Oh, so the war in Ukraine, right? That's still going on, is it?" And these aren't people who've necessarily bought into Russian narratives. They just don't see it come into their feeds. They don't see it in their newspapers. That's horrific to my mind.
There's definitely been a lot of that for sure, and we can see that, right? Because when wars happen at first, it's a swarm of different events and different articles, like we've seen in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and now it's kind of like Ukraine makes it into the headlines maybe once a month if something completely different happens, like if they strike a hospital or if they strike a school, but if it's something big. Because, for instance, in the last night's attack, there was both a school, a hospital, a university struck, and an apartment building, but it's already been done. So it's not like anyone is going to be talking about it. And it's really sad because the news is kind of has kind of become pop culture in a sense, where we report more on celebrities and we report more on, like, I don't know, Sydney Sweeney controversial ad than we do on deaths of people. For instance, one of the, I think, craziest things, well, not craziest, but one of the craziest things that sort of happened with the last missile strike is a teenage girl flew out of the window of a 9-story apartment building in her bed due to the, like, sound wave blast from a missile being taken down, and she survived. So that got picked up because that's something sensational, right? Like, there is a teenager who flew out of their apartment window from the 9th floor and survived, but then there is also 15 deaths and over 50 injuries that are not being reported at all because those have been done before. That happened last week. Why would we talk about it again? And it's a constant battle for people that talk about Ukraine and try to bring awareness to how bad things are and how much worse they're getting, because you have to fight with sort of popularity and with what's trending. And I've been seeing a lot more Ukrainian creators engage in trends, like do, like, short videos on TikTok and on Instagram that sort of follow these, like, ridiculous pop culture trends that usually, like, lifestyle influencers do and stuff like that, just so they could be noticed. And it's crazy that this is what needs to be done to talk about, your survival. um but not everything is horrible in Ukraine. I guess one of the things that happened recently that made a lot of the fuss in the news was the very controversial law, anti-corruption law. And to be fair, I'm very happy in a sense that that happened, because we were able to show as Ukrainians that even during wartime, even during martial law, democracy still works. And that was a very good situation to show that we do not live in a dictatorship, and that Zelensky is not a dictator, and that while we understand that a president can be changed during martial law, things can be changed.
And
Hope.
influence can be exerted. I mean, that it's a fascinating sort of episode, and there are two angles that sort of struck me. One is the extraordinary bravery and principled stand of the protesters, and the fact that, and this is all just anecdotal, of course, but there are many people I know who are either on the front or who have connections at the front, and I've heard nothing but support expressed by them and channeled through their friends and family, that these protests are exactly what they want to see, and exactly what they're supportive of, because they're doing their bit, and they see it as the onus is on the civilians to do their bit to build a future Ukraine. So that's an extraordinary sort of insight. I didn't really see too much of that in the mainstream media. I find it extraordinary how civil and subtle the protesters actually are. Yes, we had all these fantastic signs and the humor and so on, but very few banners in Ukrainian colors, because they went out of their way not to say that the government is illegitimate. They went out of their way not to create narratives for the Kremlin, but to express their democratic will in extremely mature fashion. It contrasts perhaps a little bit, to my mind, with the immaturity of our democratic culture, in that even a lot of pro-Ukraine people had some issues getting their heads around this. It's like, yes, I know you need to protest and do your Ukrainian thing, but don't you realize you're in a war? Don't you realize that you're an existential fight for existence? And Zelensky's the new Churchill, and he's perfect and a hero. And what's your problem? There seemed to be a little bit, not amongst everyone, but there seemed to be a little bit of that, like, I don't quite get what's going on here. And of course, the Russian propagandists didn't get it either. There's something else I noticed, which I'd just be interesting, because you're in the media. I found some of the headlines in the Kiev Independent. Now, I know exactly why the journalists there, all who are raised as the Maidan generation, who had let's say, a political activation during Maidan, it seemed to me that they flipped back into the mindset of activists rather than being objective journalists. There was a lot of hyperbole. There was almost hysteria. Now, I don't use these words lightly, because Ukrainians are often accused of being partisan or too close to the problem or emotional. I don't believe that's the case at all. Ukrainians are some of the most rational, extraordinary people on earth, and that's just not a few individuals. That is almost everybody I've spoken to. But in this instance, the Kiev Independent seemed to lose its mind a little bit. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree with that. I mean, so I was one of the protesters, and so were most of my colleagues from every news media outlet. I will kind of give a background on that. I'm very happy that everyone noticed that our posters didn't say that we wanted Zelensky out. We did in fact go out of our ways, and a lot of people that have media presence and social media presence, like myself, we were actually putting out a lot of information being like, hey, just be mindful when you go to these protests, no matter how much you want to scream at Zelensky, we all know where we're at. And, the point is the law, not shit on the president. Let's put it this way. Like, there is eyes of the world on us. This is not Maidan. There is a lot of a lot of things happening, and we want action, we want results, but we do not want propaganda to have a fantastic field day with it, and we don't want to do their job for them. So a lot of people made it a very big point to sort of reach out to the population, reach out to their readers, reach out to their viewers, and make sure that there is some sort of a common sense there. Now, Kyiv Independent is notoriously, it's very evident that they have their own bone to pick with Zelensky. So anytime there is an ability to criticize him, and anytime there is an ability to kind of go overboard on how bad he is and like how many problems there are, they do tend to be not very rational, and they do tend to be biased in a sense. Because, for instance, right, like what I always say anytime I describe the situation in Ukraine, and anytime I describe what my opinion of Zelensky is that when this happened, first of all the people around the world were losing their minds, because they're like, he has to have other reasons. There has to be something big. He would never sell out Ukraine. He would never do this. People were so crazy, because it's like, he's been such a good leader. He is fantastic at external politics and policy. He's very good. That's where he shines. This is his best he's a great wartime leader. People abroad have only seen him in the role of someone who delivers external politics. So yes, to them it's a shocker. Zelensky's rating was falling before the full-scale invasion, because where he doesn't shine, and where he, quite frankly, is very bad, is understanding internal dynamics and domestic policy. He's very bad at that. He has advice from what I understand, because he's so far removed, especially in these past 4 years, from sort of like domestic disputes and domestic situations. There are people he delegates that to, because obviously our domestic policy kind of went into the background, and everyone is putting all of their resources and effort into our international relationships, right? From what it looks like, there have been problems. The problems were legitimate. He delegated other people to sort of, figure it out. They brought him a solution. He signed it. It was not a shocker to the Ukrainian people. Ukrainians were not like, oh my God, how dare you? How could you? How did this happen? It was very expected in a sense because, like, we know that anytime it comes to domestic policy, it's not great. It seems like he's not necessarily very aware of of like what like what the population thinks on domestic issues.
So this is sort of tone deaf rather than a concerted attempt at re-corrupting or
Yeah.
re-Yanukovyczing the country.
So the thing is, I also think it was a very huge mistake on behalf of the government in terms of communications with the people, because again, they didn't necessarily need to communicate anything with the Ukrainian people in like 4 years. Because usually what they communicate is the stuff that we all agree on, which has to do with external politics. So they don't necessarily have to like get our approval or feel the waters before they do it. We usually like we support them in what they do. This was, yes, there was quite a bit of corruption in all of these anti-corruption agencies. Yes, things needed to change, but where they miscalculated is they didn't come to the people and they didn't say, here are the things that are happening. Here are the people that we are investigating, and here are the things that we need to eliminate that have gone overboard and have actually halted efforts in anti-corruption fighting in the past 4 years and resulted in this, this, and this, right? What they did is they came out and said, okay, so we're taking these independent agencies that were a result of Maidan because they were directly formed after Maidan. And we are making them not independent. We're in fact going to make them subservient to the prosecutor general, who's subservient to the office of the president. That's not a good look. It looks like they're trying to decommission things that actually investigate corruption. It looks like what Yanukovych used to do before all of these agencies emerged. So not only does it look like a like a spit in the face to the people, it's also PTSD and trauma, because to the general population it's like, okay, there's no communication. You just decided out of nowhere that you want the anti-corruption agencies to what, not be independent, those same anti-corruption agencies that investigate you. Like how, so I think that
And then he shares his reasons, but in a very sort of panicked fashion. It then looks like an excuse rather than
yeah.
any kind of reasoning.
So it was a little, it was too little, too late, right? And I think the biggest mistake that they made is not communicating, because again, they're also so used to making decisions and people agreeing with these decisions and it's not because we agree with everything they do. It's just because it so happened that everything they have been doing so far has been aimed at the international policy and
More or
politics.
less an alignment. I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
stuff takes a lot longer than I guess people would want, like reform of the army,
yeah,
reform of the sort of Soviet hierarchy there. And there's
yeah,
lots of examples where they just, mobilization, where they drag their feet with sort of endless
yeah.
debates, but it happens in the end.
But generally, like, we agree with it, right? So I think it was honestly a lot of mistakes made, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of lack of communication, and a lot of Zelensky sort of not thinking straight about how that would impact the people without all of the above mentioned, and how they would feel and what type of like response it would evoke. So I don't think it was a concerted effort for corruption. First of all, like, I have a colleague. Her name is Yulia Tymoshenko, not the former prime minister, an activist.
That's
Uh,
Ukraine, Ukraine, Yulia. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Yulia,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But see, we have Yulia Tymoshenko, who's the former prime minister, who's should not be listened to
That's the
at
sort of
all.
space buns, crazy space
Yeah.
buns lady. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have Yulia Tymoshenko, who is in her 20s, and she's a fantastic journalist and activist, and she's amazing. And so she did like a compilation of answering questions on Instagram from people who had a lot of questions about this law, and they were like, "Do you think Zelensky is corrupt?" and was like trying to hide his corruption. And it's the thing is like he hasn't been there has been zero investigations opened into him because he hasn't done anything that would warrant that. So there is not necessarily like there is zero reason for him to want to hide his own corruption, because again, these agencies are independent, and he is, it's like all lights are on him, all eyes are on him. We have had zero questions to him when it comes to corruption, right? There's
And
certain like
even Kiev Independent had to acknowledge that. I found that interesting when they did an interview with Shabunin. He was like, it was like scandal, scandal. Yanukovych. I mean, Yanukovych built himself a giant palace, extorted
hmm
billions of dollars out of the country, and
hmm
even or I think it's Olga Rodenko, is it the editor of
yeah, yeah,
Kiev Independent?
Olga.
Even she had to say in this interview, it's like, but we have no evidence of any wrongdoing. And then Shabuna said, no, there's never been any implication from anybody, even in terms of gossip, of Zelensky extorting money for personal gain. I mean, he doesn't need to. He's
Yeah,
pretty well off from his media career.
yeah, exactly.
So this seemed to me to be like, okay, so maybe Zelensky will be protecting people in his inner circle, and it's not impossible that people in his inner circle may be complicit in all sorts of things. But would he put them ahead of his own standing, his own career, his own position, his country? It seems incredible that he'd sacrifice everything for a few corrupt people around him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so for one, like, right, I want to come back a little bit to like Zelensky being wealthy. Like, one of the reasons why Russian propaganda likes calling him a comedian is to diminish him and to sort of like give way to these narratives. Because Zelensky is not just a comedian. He started his career in comedy. However, he was a producer, a director, of many incredibly successful movies, TV shows, comedy shows in Russia, skits, sort of like in Russia and Ukraine, we used to have those like New Year's specials and like holiday specials and stuff like that with like a bunch of celebrities and them singing. They're kind of like musicals, right? Those things
Right,
brought in.
I've seen
uh,
those. I've seen the Russian version of those anyway.
I mean,
Oh,
I've always hated them, but the thing is, like, they are, like those are all of the biggest celebrities in each of these countries, right? And those things bring in so much money because during
huge ad
holiday
revenue.
season,
Yeah.
everyone is watching them, right?
And you
He's
just have to look
directed,
at Kvartal 95, right? They've got a
yeah,
YouTube channel which has 5 billion views or something. I checked it out the other day.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
exactly.
not short of a penny or two.
Well, but also he had a production company. So his business was a production company. So he hired actors, he produced movies, he produced TV shows. His company was like one of the most successful in the post USSR space, and Russians loved him. And like there are tons of like super famous Russian movies. Like let's say the US had Sex in the City. We had something similar, right? That was filmed in Russia and Moscow, and it was like half Ukrainian actors, half Russian actors, whatever. It used to be like a very combined space. He produced that, he created that. It's like one of the biggest grossing movies in general. He was rich, like very rich. Like he is um like his production studio is Universal Studios of the post-Soviet space. So it's kind of like, it's really stupid to call him a comedian and say that he hasn't like accomplished anything because he was one of the richest producers in the
And
post-Soviet
not
space.
inherited wealth, someone who's built
No,
that entirely from
exactly.
talent.
He
Exactly.
did.
Um,
So it's
so it looks like he's rode back on the law. He's responded, and it seems
yeah.
that this has, in some ways, taken the anger out of it, and the
Mhm.
protesters feel like they've attained a victory, and he has been willing to grant them a victory in this. At least that's what it
Yeah.
appears.
Well, also the people feel like they have control, right? And we do. And it's sort of like that's kind of the thing where we wanted to know that we can still influence decision making in this country, no matter whether there is martial law or not. Also, one of the interesting thing is, yes, Shabunin is an anti-corruption activist, but however, there he is also a murky character in a sense where like Zelensky and his team creating or going back on that law bad. Shabunin saying that he was persecuted because of like personal reasons and all of this stuff, wrong, because he is of a mobilization age. He was listed in the army. He didn't in fact serve. There are a lot of things that would prompt you to investigate him. So it's like kind of like, one of the reasons why this him as an example or him as like the face of this situation is a really bad idea is because he kind of took the actually bad situation that people can rally behind and put his
Yeah.
own cause merged and like merged with it. But those are two different things.
He
The
seemed to
fact that
remind me a little bit of Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, someone who ostensibly might be doing something useful, and now it turns out
yeah,
that he was very much aligned with a Kremlin agenda to selectively leak. But his personality, his gigantic sort of and massive narcissistic ego
yeah,
is placed at the center of the issue. And I immediately got that vibe off Charbonnier in this interview. It's like, I want to be center stage, right? Spotlight, spotlight.
exactly, because it's kind of like one of those things where, like, to me it seems like, and I don't know him personally, right? But it seems like you think of yourself above the law because you're an anti-corruption activist, but that doesn't mean that mobilization laws don't apply to you. Like, yes, of course, like, thank you for, fighting corruption, thank you for, like, for raising money for the military. Tons of people do that. However, they're still obliged to show up to a
Yes.
military recruitment office if they do get the letter, right?
And
And
if
it
you
does
build a
seem.
real organization, you should build in the idea that it's
Yeah,
not entirely dependent on you. You build a
yeah.
team that can take over.
And the funny thing is, fighting corruption, but using corruption when it suits you is not necessarily a good example, because in order for you to have stayed behind and received a military salary and been like recruited but not actually been to the front lines, you had to have engaged in corruption because you had to have pulled your connections, right? So it's a very murky territory. I know a lot of people that have been doing the exact same stuff as Shabunian, and then they went and enlisted recently. Like my friend's husband, actually, he's not even eligible for mobilization, but he went and he recently joined a unit because he feels like this is an important
Hmm.
part of his contribution that needs to happen.
Well, there's a phenomenal charity in a phenomenal team of technologists in Lviv who I have done
Mm.
fundraising for, Jiga's Poor and the
Zeus,
husband,
I love them.
Dimka.
Yes.
Dimka went and served. And he spent a year building an organization that could function without him. He figured out a role where he could add value, which is
Hmm.
testing the kit and gathering data on the front and implementing best practice in the unmanned systems forces. I mean, this is the perfect example of how you do that stuff from an extraordinary sort of moral standpoint and standpoint of bravery as well.
Well, no, he honestly, he's one of the first charities that I got introduced to because they're from Lviv and I was in New York and I'm from Lviv, so it was kind of like near and dear to me. And what he has done is one of the most prime examples of how Ukrainians engage with the situation, and not only, when people say like, oh, no one wants to serve, no one wants to fight, and all of this stuff, like that's not true, because there are people that don't have to do that. There are people that are exempt from having to go and mobilize themselves, like Dima, because he was ahead of a massive organization that was actually bringing in a lot behind the front lines, a lot more value behind the front lines than he himself would at the front, but he still went and did it because it's his moral obligation and duty in his head, right? And I think he's still there, though. He might have. His wife is running the organization, and she.
That's right. Irina's running the organization, and yes, he's serving. The
Yeah,
last I saw in the Zaporizhia direction, which he sort of it's posted online, so that's
yeah.
not a secret. Yeah, extraordinary. There's a great interview on my channel with him recently where he talks about the evolution of drone warfare, and that's an inspiration. And I think it helps you have those people. It helps that there are people willing to challenge power, because
Mhm.
the kind of innovations, the kind of non-hierarchical, intelligence and motivation that Maidan helped to unleash, or that talent helped Maidan along as well. Everything in the system needs to be fought if it is
Yeah.
preventing these kind of people from realizing their talent and expressing it. And of course, we know there's a lot of stuff in the army that doesn't necessarily allow that to happen, which is both sort of behavioral reform, cultural reform, and of course legislative reform is required. So it seems to me what's happened in the last week is critical, not in and of that law only, but simply the idea that progress on all sorts of fronts is possible within governance in wartime, and actually is an essential process for victory.
For sure. And it's really, I mean, I think it was needed. Something like this was needed for the people to feel the power again, for the people to feel in control again. And I think this did a lot for morale, to be honest, and I think it did kind of give us a renewed energy. And I think that partially, having gone through this situation has actually given Ukrainians more good than bad, because again, people feel like they're in control, and they are, in a sense.
And I
It was
think that
actually,
the whole story, it's telling, isn't it, that Russian propagandists don't know how to handle it, and activists who are at first a little bit unsure and nervous, I think, have come round to say, okay, we've been reminded of why we support Ukraine now.
yeah, for sure. And it was honestly, being at those protests, it was unbelievable energy. And one of the things that I, as someone who's been in America for a little too long, found very interesting is, first, it was swarming with police, but the police was there specifically to protect the people. And it did not feel like, I guess like the most recent protests in America, you didn't necessarily feel like the police was there to protect you. You felt like they were watching your every move. And the second you do something wrong or breathe wrong, they'll arrest you. And in Ukraine, it was very different. It was sort of like you didn't have that feeling. The police constantly chanted that the police is with the people. There were ambulances on site if someone would if someone would feel wouldn't feel good. So it's kind of like, it was the way protests are supposed to be. And then reading online from Russian propagandists that it's a dictatorship and people are rising against the dictatorship, it's like, you can't rise in a dictatorship. The police is not there to assist you in a dictatorship. There are no ambulances meant for your health in a dictatorship. And the other thing that I think like perfectly encompasses Ukraine and what's happening in Ukraine, and kind of like the Ukrainian mentality, is that, so the government in Ukraine is called Vlada, and Vlada means both the government and it means power. So it's a good play on words. And one of the chants was power is the people, or like government is the people. So it was a very big, kind of like all encompassing phrase of what Ukraine is and how Ukraine's lawmaking processes are, right? Because the people came out there to remind the government that we are the government and that you are just the vassals of what we believe in. You're not there to impose your ideas onto us. You're there to bring our ideas and our desires into fruition.
Power is subordinate to the people, and I think even in wartime, that reminder
Yeah.
was actually rather important. Well, things are moving so fast, aren't they? I'm sure next time we have a chat, there are going to be a million squillion different things to cover, and maybe,
Yeah.
just maybe, Trump might have taken some action, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Well, we have what, 10 days for his newest deadline? Let's see. Let's see if
I'm not
that
counting
one.
my chickens. Yeah.
Well, neither am I, but who knows? Maybe a miracle will happen. Well, thank you for being here, Jonathan. Thank you for having a conversation with me today.
It's a tremendous pleasure as always.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Jonathan is a pretty frequent and a very welcome guest in our channel. And if you would like to see more conversations like that and more amazing people, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, and of course, as per usual, leave your comments, questions, suggestions down below, because I read all of them and I appreciate all of them.